The year is 1492. Christopher Columbus, in search of a faster route to the East Indies, instead stumbled upon the vast, uncharted lands of the New World. While his arrival would forever alter the course of history, it was merely the beginning of a series of encounters that would shape a continent. Over the next century, European powers, Spain, France, and England, would establish colonies along the eastern coast of North America. At first, these settlers were focused on trade and survival, but as time passed, their ambitions expanded. Spain laid claim to Florida and the southwestern territories, while France established New France in what is now Canada, along with trading posts along the Mississippi River. But it was England's efforts that would have the most enduring legacy. In 1607, the first permanent English settlement, Jamestown, was founded in Virginia. The early years were harsh. Disease, starvation, and conflict with Native American tribes ravaged the settlers. Yet, through determination and the introduction of tobacco cultivation, Jamestown began to thrive. Soon after, more colonies sprouted along the coast, from Plymouth to the Carolinas, forming a fragmented but growing English presence on the continent. The settlers, hungry for more land and resources, often came into conflict with the Native Americans who had lived on the land for thousands of years. The indigenous populations, who had built complex societies and cultures, found themselves increasingly pushed aside, their lives disrupted by disease, war, and displacement. Despite efforts at peaceful coexistence, the relationship between the settlers and the Native Americans would be forever marked by violence and broken promises. As the 17th century came to a close, the English colonies were thriving economically, but were divided by political, religious, and economic tensions. These rifts would continue to grow, setting the stage for a major reckoning in the years to come. Revolution and independence. By the mid-18th century, the American colonies were well established, yet the relationship between the colonies and the British Crown was strained. The colonies had long enjoyed a degree of autonomy, but this began to change after the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763, a conflict between Britain and France over territories in North America. To pay off war debts, the British government began imposing taxes on the colonies, such as the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts, forcing colonists to bear the financial burden of the empire's wars. The response was swift and fierce. The colonists, who had no representation in Parliament, began to resist. No taxation without representation became their rallying cry. Tensions escalated, culminating in the Boston Massacre of 1770 and the Boston Tea Party of 1773, an act of defiance that saw colonists dump British tea into the harbor to protest the Tea Act. The British government responded by tightening control over the colonies, and the situation quickly spiraled toward rebellion. In April 1775, fighting broke out at Lexington and Concord, marking the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. The colonies, led by figures like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and Benjamin Franklin, banded together to fight for their independence. The Declaration of Independence, penned by Jefferson, announced to the world that the colonies were no longer subjects of the British Crown, but free and independent states. The war would last for 8 long years. The odds were stacked against the fledgling nation, but with the aid of France and through sheer determination, the Americans triumphed. In 1783, Britain formally recognized the United States' independence with the Treaty of Paris. Formation of the new nation. With independence secured, the challenge was just beginning. The newly formed nation faced a myriad of problems. The Articles of Confederation, the first Constitution of the United States, proved ineffective in uniting the diverse states. In 1787, the Founding Fathers convened in Philadelphia to draft a new constitution, one that would create a more powerful central government while balancing the rights of individual states. The result was the U.S. Constitution, signed on September 17, 1787. It established the framework for the federal government, with a system of checks and balances between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. The Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, was added shortly afterward, guaranteeing basic freedoms like speech, religion, and the right to a fair trial. However, the new nation was far from perfect. Deep divisions over slavery, states' rights, and the role of government simmered beneath the surface. These tensions would soon erupt, threatening to tear the nation apart. Expansion and conflict. Throughout the 19th century, the United States expanded rapidly. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 doubled the size of the nation, providing vast new lands to settle. As settlers pushed westward, they encountered resistance from Native American tribes who were forced from their ancestral lands. The government, eager to open up the land for agriculture and industry, employed policies like the Indian Removal Act, leading to the infamous Trail of Tears, where thousands of Native Americans died during forced relocations. The nation also faced internal conflicts over the institution of slavery. In the South, slavery was deeply entrenched in the agricultural economy, while in the North, abolitionist sentiment was growing. These differences, along with the question of whether new territories would permit slavery, eventually led to the Civil War. Civil War and Reconstruction. The Civil War, 1861 to 1865, was a devastating conflict that tore the nation in two. The Southern states, led by figures like Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee, seceded from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America. They fought to preserve their way of life, including the institution of slavery. The Northern states, under President Abraham Lincoln, fought to preserve the Union and end slavery. The war was brutal, with massive casualties on both sides. The Union eventually triumphed, and slavery was abolished with the passage of the 13th Amendment. The South, however, was left in ruins. The period of Reconstruction sought to rebuild the South and integrate formerly enslaved people into American society. But it was marked by political struggles, racial violence, and the rise of white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan. Industrialization and the Gilded Age. The late 19th century saw the rise of industrialization transforming the United States into an economic powerhouse. Railroads, factories, and steel mills sprang up across the country, leading to unprecedented economic growth. Figures like Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and J.P. Morgan built vast fortunes, while millions of immigrants flocked to the U.S. in search of opportunity. But this period was also marked by inequality and corruption. The Gilded Age, a term coined by Mark Twain, was characterized by extreme wealth disparity, child labor, and political corruption. Workers began to organize for better conditions, leading to the rise of labor unions, world wars, and the Roaring Twenties. The 20th century brought both world wars and dramatic social changes. The United States entered World War I in 1917, helping tip the balance in favor of the Allies. After the war, the country experienced a period of prosperity, known as the Roaring Twenties, marked by cultural change, jazz, and the rise of consumerism. However, the stock market crash of 1929 and the ensuing Great Depression brought hardship to millions. President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal sought to provide relief, reform, and recovery, but it was the outbreak of World War II that would truly reshape the nation. The U.S. emerged from the war as a global superpower, setting the stage for its dominance in the 20th century. Civil rights and social change. The 1960s and 1970s were decades of social upheaval. The civil rights movement, led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X, fought for racial equality and justice. The movement's success led to landmark legislation, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This period also saw the rise of the feminist movement, the LGBTQ+ rights movement, and the anti-war movement, particularly against the Vietnam War. The societal changes of this era would continue to shape the nation for decades to come. Modern America. As the 21st century dawned, the United States faced new challenges. The attacks on September 11, 2001, marked a defining moment, leading to the War on Terror and the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. Domestically, the country grappled with economic crises, political polarization, and debates over health care, immigration, and climate change. Today, the U.S. continues to evolve, caught between its ideals of liberty and justice and the realities of a rapidly changing world. Its future remains uncertain, but its past, marked by triumph, failure, and resilience, will continue to shape its path forward. Conclusion. The United States has come a long way since its founding, but the journey is far from over. It is a nation built on ideals, but those ideals have often been at odds with the realities of its history. From the struggles for independence to the battles for civil rights, from industrial growth to modern-day challenges, America continues to be a land of contradictions, progress, and potential.